sweating. Yes, hello from my side. Should I introduce myself? I work in the area of BPM for 15 years, which is odd because I don't feel that old yet. However, I've been working as a programmer on automation engines. I've been helping companies to set up BPM, more on the organizational side also. I switched sides now once again, and I am a lecturer, professor at the University of Applied Science in Wildau, which is near Berlin. And I was invited by Oliver to talk about process innovation, and I took the chance to also innovate on some of my ideas. So this is a new slide set that you are going to see, and you're the very first ones to see it. I hope you will enjoy it. It does not have too many fancy graphics like the old other ones due to time restrictions, yet it will help us, I hope. What I want to do is I want to set an impulse for you to go into discussion. So I'm not going to talk for an hour. I'm going to talk for maybe 15 minutes, and then you will go into discussion groups in which you can elaborate on the ideas that I hopefully can deliver some starting points for. So what I want to talk about is, it's the same trouble that everybody else has. How to, so, nee, auch nicht. Jetzt, super. Once again. I want to, first of all, make the point, so why the heck should we care about the way we do process innovation or rethink about our processes? What are the tools that we can use to change the interaction, the way that we talk about processes, and what can we do to facilitate more innovative processes on a more global level? So first of all, everybody here is in the BPM area as their core business? Is that? Can you raise your hand if you're working in BPM? Only some. Okay. So maybe it makes sense to there are a lot of maybe definitions for that. I often use the ones here on the slide. For me, it's a discipline on how to govern and develop how organizations do their work. And if you look at this, it has two aspects. The first one is governing how work is done. The second one is developing further how we do our work. So governing is something like establishing, modeling guidelines, role concepts, capturing as-is processes, capturing everything that you need in order to be, for example, compliant, so you can be audited. At that point, you haven't really changed anything, right? It's just about capturing what is already there. But there's typically another coin to that, which is developing further the organization. And it might start with something like analyzing weaknesses and opportunities, but it's essentially about building new processes. And there are typically two ways in which this is done. One is by a more, like in a process in which you collect ideas, you rate ideas, you prioritize, and then you select the next step that you can go in terms of development of your process, typically referred to as continuous improvement process. Who has heard about continuous improvement process? Some. Who has this continuous improvement process in place in their organization? Only a few. Okay. If you don't have this, actually, I'm a big fan of that, because what it means is that you again and again go and look at your process and you ask yourself, what can we do better? And it might just be an improvement of like 4 or 5 or 10%, but if you do that every year, it adds up a lot. Everybody who knows back then the times when we had like 4, 5, 6% interest rates in a bank, you know what it can mean to have 10 years of 10%, right? But going in such a continuous improvement only means, or typically means that you stick with a process that you already have, and then you try to add something to change smaller pieces, right? We do not fax, we just now send emails, something like that. But it doesn't help you to really leap forward, questioning whether we should send the fax or whether we should do a totally other approach towards this process. And that is typically referred to as business process re-engineering. Have you heard of the term re-engineering? Some people nodding. It's basically, the interesting point about re-engineering is this goes back to a book that was published early in the 90s. And this book relies on projects that were done in the 70s and 80s. And they typically refer to process re-engineering done in companies like insurances, back then when they first bought the very first computer, right? So all of a sudden, there's a new technology, and it's clear that doing the old process with the new technology might not make that much sense. So you really want to reinvent how you do your process, and you wipe away everything that was done per se. What is also clear is that this is something that takes a lot of effort for your organization, right? You cannot do that every year. You cannot throw away all the things you know about your process every 2 or 3 years and start all over again. You need, most of the time, the continuous improvement process. But maybe there's something that we can borrow from the concept here, where we make bigger leaps and bring that into our daily discussions on what can we do next, right? So first of all, let's have a look at why would we do re-engineering of processes. A typical indicator in the last decades was always new technology. And we see that today as well. Like 10 years ago, nobody had a smartphone. These days, everybody has to have an app because people tend to be, glued to their smartphone somewhat. And this is something that we're going to see over and over and over again also in the next decades coming. The second one, and this was talked already about it today, is changing customer expectations, right? When customers don't want your process to be delivering this type of results that it used to do in the last decades, you have to adopt. And that is typically something where you also need a bigger effort in order to come to a new process. Then there are also internal triggers, like you have a new business model, you want to, for example, expand the type of business that you're doing, but there might be something also like you've bought some other company and you have to do a reorganization. In this case, it often is useful to start on a whiteboard and do not adopt the process of one or the other organization, but rather develop something together. These two things you can steer to a certain extent, right? You decide, or your company decides on whether you want to do a new business model, or whether you're going to buy Monsanto and go to a restructuring. These things, like technology and changing customer expectations, they come to you. That is nothing that you do, but the market is doing that, and you have to act, you have to adopt, right? So what is done in re-engineering projects? You don't go through the normal structure of your organization, but you build a project team. And that project team should typically be an interdisciplinary team. It's also not like just some people. Typically, it's the best of the best of the best people that you put together because you want this problem to be solved really good, right? And then we see something that we have also heard today, and this is not my ideas on how that should work. This is 1970s, 1980s experience on how it should work, right? You start with a damn customer, and then you work out what the customer needs. That's your output that your process has to produce, and then you move backwards. How do I, what are the last steps that I have to do, and so on and so forth, until you reach the start of your process. Well, you don't start with the starting of your process, but you end with the start of your process, and you start with your customer, his needs, and then you go into your process description. What is also in that is, since you're doing something totally new, you want to move fast and prototype ideas. So don't find out in 2 years' time that it's not possible to build it the way that you initially thought it would be possible. The faster you can prototype, the more ideas you can try out, and the easier it's therefore also easier to let loose of ideas. Like you have an idea, you go out, ask somebody, or prototype it on the street by just having 3 cards that show your idea, and people will tell you whether it's worth pursuing it or not, right? So if you have instruments in place for faster prototyping, you have a good chance of trying out more ideas and achieving more insights cheaply or cheaper. And the last one, which is seems to be obvious, but it's the hardest one for customers or companies to accept, is you have to deal with risk. It's okay, and you have to deal with imperfections. You know, from Lean Startup, the term of minimal viable product, right? You need to be ashamed of the solutions that you provide. It should be working somewhat, but don't invest too much into polishing your ideas, polishing your solution. The earlier you can get feedback, and only if it's just on a 10% solution, the better you're off, because you don't invest into problems or into ideas that are not worth pursuing. So, given this, as a way how the disruptive innovation is done, the question is now, how can you take this into your everyday workshop, right? And I have 4 ideas for you. I hope you'll like them. The first one is, of course, engage people. Who had thought of it? But this is not, engaging means, of course, selecting people, right? That are knowledgeable, that are in best case interdisciplinary. But it also means enabling them to take part in the innovation. And that means reducing the method set that you have to a minimum. Because if you have a very minimalistic method, people can adopt it. To give an example, most of you might know BPMN as a modeling standard, which has about 150 elements that you can use in order to model. And they have a good value for people that, for example, do process automation. Most organizations, though, use about 10 of these elements because they want to have more people in their organization participate in the discussion. So it's not about being very, very precise on all aspects, but it's about having a tool that people at least are capable of using in order to start a discussion, right? So if you want to engage people outside of your typical scope, make them use simple tools. Then you should set a certain type of scope for all your projects or all your initiatives in which you change processes. The question is now, who is setting the scope and how far will you get, right? So what I have made a good experience with is when you allow people to, or when you want to engage people into innovating their process, it makes a lot of sense that you tell them what they are allowed to think. Because a lot of people think that moving out of this office is not an option. Whereas for maybe the CEO or CIO, or whoever is the person who is giving is a contracting authority, for them that might be an option. So you have to tell them what they should preserve and what they should maybe challenge, right? So for every project, you should also not only give them, this is where I want you to go, but also some guidance on what they are able to, should be thinking of and what they should not think of, so to say. In this term, it makes also sense to think about who is going to be the contracting authority. Usually we think about the process owner as being the contracting authority. If you look at re-engineering processes, re-engineering projects, since they are projects, these are projects, there is a project steering committee. And maybe it makes sense in some process innovation to not only have the process owner, but more people being the contracting authority. Because process owners might in some cases, chicken out on setting a challenging scope. So if you have said that, then people come into your workshop or whatever, and you have to enable them to create more ideas, fresh ideas here, all the stuff that you know from brainstorming, that we all know actually, but barely it is in place, should be used in order to give people a chance to express their ideas and also to create new ideas. And once more, what is important here is the viewing angle. Start with the customer. Start the whole discussion with the customer. Maybe you have done a customer journey, you gain some insights. These are the starting points for your workshop. Then you have your persona from the customer. You define what the customer wants, the output and the quality. And then, only then, you go and define your processes. And finally, I said it before, don't polish prototype. So people often think that they may not be able to think out of the box or to think a wild idea because the sheer fact that it might fail produces so much overhead and costs, right? That they would be rather willing to go to not take a big step, but rather take a smaller step to reduce their risk. So my proposal is use this ambitious scope, create a visionary process. Like, how would it look like if Google was solving it? Or you can use questions like, how would this process look in 2030, right? So people think ahead of the current process innovation, create a visionary to-be process, and only then you can start deriving development steps towards this visionary process. Because one thing is clear, to go a big step is always requiring a bigger project, which is not always possible given the resources. So it makes sense to say, well, we create a visionary process, and we know where we want to be in 2025, and the next step we're going to do in order to get there is to get rid of this part or to automate this part. And you know that we want to go there in 2025, so please start buying a system that will support us in 2023 when we want to go this particular step, right? So aim further. These are 4 aspects that you can use. I want to give you 4 examples, simple examples on how we might do this. First of all, you want to engage people and allow for simpler tools. This is similar to the movement idea. These are plastic tiles that you can use on the table. They reflect BPMN as modeling elements, and they can be written on like whiteboards. They're quite heavy. You cannot break them. It's just like a toy. It's like playing with Lego or something like this. And given such a tool, nobody can say, well, I'm not able to use it, right? Or it's a too complicated framework. What is important, though, is that these people directly interact with the solution. They build their solutions. They are engaged. And they, for the first time, are forced to really think on the steps and the implications that it means when I move a step from back and forth and so on. So the more you have those simpler tools in order to engage people, or the simpler the tool, the easier it is to get people in using it, right? This doesn't mean you don't have like a symbiote solution later on in order where you refine the idea. But the first step is about getting people to build their own solution, and the simpler the tools you use, the easier it is for them to get there. The second one that I talked about is scoping the process innovation. I use a framework which the contracting authority has to think about. So if you give a contract to people to innovate on the process, what should they assume, preserve, challenge, and keep in mind? Assumption is something like, assume a certain situation has come, like the project XYZ that you might rely on has actually completed successfully. Because the people on the top that have more a strategic view know what is coming before the people on the working level might believe that it's coming, right? So you give them something like, okay, assume this has happened. Preserve is something that you want them not to change, and challenge is everything that they might change, right? So in this case, they can rethink the way that current payment procedures are done, but they should use the portal as a primary interface to the customer. And then keep in mind, this is typically the bigger things like I don't know, we have an aging customer bases, we are in a world of global warming, we assume, keep in mind that this and this and this has happened, right? So, or that there are going to be resources changes and so on and so on. So this is just a hint towards what they should also be worried about. So when it comes to getting people into creating more and innovative ideas, one important aspect, or something that I usually use, and there might be is much more, is brainwriting. So instead of just brainstorming where everybody is throwing ideas and some person is trying to write them all down with his framing in his hands and so on and so forth, you just give everybody pen and paper and ask them, write down the 5 most important aspects that you see. And before you actually start the discussion, you do 1 or 2 of those rounds in which everybody is forced, but also able to think for themselves on what they want to share with the rest of the group. And usually I do this in 2 groups, in 2 iterations. So first, people map out what they have done. everybody for themselves. Then it's shared. Nobody's talking, right? Then you look at what other people have written, and then you have a chance to write once again what you think should be added. This is not only true when you think about, oh, how could we? But I also use this when going into process mappings, right? So what are your 5 most important steps that you see? What you get, for example, in this case, you get a process with only 5 steps, you might think. But you get 5 different opinions written down, which you can now compare to each other. So this says approve, this says approve request. Do we mean the same? Should we use this term because it's more accurate? Or is it actually something that we should split up, right? So you all of a sudden have a very concrete aspect on what you will discuss with the group. And finally, on prototyping, there's so much you can do. I use little how do you say, dolls and stuff like that. Everything that has a smile, right? In order to go through the process and people in the type of a role play. This is one early type of prototyping that you can employ in every workshop. Yet when you go on the street, talk to customers, when you talk to your spouse, husband, wife, whatever, there's a lot of opportunities to just try out and prototype ideas. The most famous one is probably the Mechanical Turk. You know that? The first chess computer was actually a small minion sitting inside a box and playing chess, which was like in the 1800s, which is a synonym for fake it till you make it. So when you want to give a customer experience, there's a lot of ways you can make them think this is what they will experience, even though there's nothing implemented behind it, right? So there's a lot of ways that you can prototype your ideas. And the earlier you do it, the cheaper you do it, the better. So, what I want to give you as an advice is the tech and customer-driven innovations are going to also drive us and drive process innovations in companies in the next decades. This is not going away, even though your company is not buying anybody else. When you do, sometimes it's clear that you have to do a business process re-engineering, but you can only do that for a process like every 10 years or something. And in between that, you should try to use BPR principles in your daily process discussions in order to make bigger steps forward and maybe postpone a bigger BPR project in the further future, right? And the rethinking is facilitated by the environment, which is the scope, the type of steering committees that you implement. And this is what I want to use as the stop for my talking, at the beginning of the discussion on how we can implement these things. So we have prepared 3 rooms, 2 of them cool though, one of them a bit hotter, you might know. And in every group, you're going to have, good thing is, you will move to every of those rooms. Yeah? The first group is going to stay here. No, sorry, it's going to go to this. Then you come here, you go there, and so on and so forth. So we change one room to the other. And in these rooms, you can have a discussion. So it's a bit like a World Cafe scenario, in which you can discuss on a particular topic. For example, how can we set up initiatives for change? What can we do on this side? How can we enable fresh and new ideas in workshops? I gave you some ideas, but there's much, much more you might know. And how can we test and iterate and implement changes faster? So what will happen is you're going to have 3 hosts, which is Oliver, Thorsten, da? Danke. Entschuldigung. 3 hosts. You know your numbers. You have a number? 1, 2, 3. 1, 3. Very good. And you can follow them in 10 minutes time. There will be a gong or something like that, and then you can change the room. One important aspect. You typically, in such a scenario, it's not so much about the results that you leave, but about the discussions that you have. So use the time to discuss. But you might leave one key message to the group that comes after you, right? Not 20 or something. try to figure out one key message that is worth sharing with the next group, and then you will come to a table where somebody else has shared one thought to start off with the discussion. All right? You might ask yourself, what is my number? So let's try to figure it out. Number 1. Do you know the number? Haven't you got the memo? You're number 1. Must it? Yeah, okay. Okay. 2? 1, 2. Ja, genau. 2. 2, 2, 3, 1, and 2. All right? So, enjoy your time, and see you later on here.